Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the Titans of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. We have a very special episode for you here today. We are going to talk about the future of primary care. And joining me today are the CEOs of Crossover Health, Apree Health, and Elation Health. And I'll let everyone give their own intro, and then we'll dig into some of the core topics that we have here today. I'm really excited to get started. So let's start with Crossover Health CEO.
Hey guys, Scott Shreeve, founder CEO of Crossover Health, and I've had the privilege to be leading the organization for the last 12 years. So appreciate being here today.
Absolutely, we're excited. And now we have Apree Health.
Jared, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here. Echo Scott on that regard. I am Donald Trigg. I'm the CEO of Apree Health. I'm a 20-year veteran of the intersection of healthcare and IT. And prior to my current role, where I've been in post now for a little bit more than a month, I was the president of Cerner Corporation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Don. And Kyna with Elation Health.
Hey, Jared. Thanks so much for having me on today. Looking forward to the conversation. So I'm Kyna Fong, the CEO and co-founder here at Elation Health. We build a purpose-built technology platform for high-value primary care. So looking forward to talking more about the future of primary care.
I love it. I'm excited to dig in. I'd love if we could each go around. We'll start with you, Kyna, real quick. I'd love to hear what led each of you into primary care. So we'll start with Kyna, we'll go Don, and then Scott.
Yeah, so it was a little involuntary, I would say. So my dad is a primary care physician. I was born and raised in Canada where he practiced. And one day he sort of came home. This is right before I started high school. He came home and he said, hey, I can't practice the type of personalized medicine I want to. And so we're moving to the U.S. Not exactly the thing you want to hear as you're about to start high school, but we moved down ended up in California. And, and so I was one of the older two kids with my co-founder, Kyna, and we helped him build a primary care practice from scratch. And so that is when I, really got exposed to primary care. And I think in particular, being on the front lines of care, short of being a clinician, but I think it was a really formative time for me to see, the deep, trusted personal relationships that exist on the front lines of primary care. And it was really that in combination with, fast forward 10 years, when we were trying to put technology into the practice and starting Elation, I think that experience really grounded me and Kyna in why primary care is important and what needs to be preserved about it, despite, the importance of technology, really always bringing it back to the relationship and the trust in order to have effective primary care. And when you have it, the really incredible value and outcomes it can drive. And so that's how I got into primary care as a kid. And it feeds into the story of Elation.
Thanks, Kyna. Don, would love to hear how you got into primary care as well.
Kyna, I love that story. I love that. I love that kind of path, that journey path. Look, I believe that there's a massive affordability crisis in U.S. healthcare. I think in the commercial space where we focus, that's an area that's going to see a double-digit cost trend as we start to think about some of the inflationary dynamics pulling through into the healthcare space. So I think there's a real crisis of affordability. I think that primary care as a key linchpin to how the individual navigates provider network and health network strategies is critically important in terms of what it looks like to solve for that. And for our company, where we're bringing together a combination of assets, I saw the chance to build out an integrated and enterprise strategy that could meet the appetite of the market to, I think, want to look at total cost of care and how primary care could be a part of addressing it.
We're going to kick it over to you, Scott. What led you to primary care?
Sure. Yeah. Of interest, I'm an emergency medicine physician. So I went all through medical school and my training and really got into my practice. And I just could not believe that, what was happening in the emergency room and, where was, primary care and why were all these people kind of coming to this place of care of last resort? And I really, would see my 30, 40 patients a day. And I'm just like, man, how do I get more upstream to actually have an impact on the lives of all the people that I had the privilege to take care of? And I also felt the need, like, could I, go beyond just seeing those 30 patients a day? Could I have an impact at a larger scale? And really, it just came down to like, hey, I became really interested in the financing of healthcare and how that worked. And, really thought that primary care was heavily and grossly underfunded. And could it be done different and better? And this is the time that the iPhone was just coming out and all this new technology and different ways to engage the members. And I just really became enamored by that idea. And so we started crossover with the idea that, you could really change primary care. And that was the orientation I came to this at, having seen it from the lens of an emergency department to now looking systematically at why can care be done different? Can it be paid for different? Can it be experienced differently? And we just felt like we couldn't do that within the traditional healthcare system. We'd have to go out to find people who are willing to pay for care in a different way. And we knew it couldn't be to the consumers initially. And so we stumbled upon this area where all these self-insured employers are funding their own healthcare. They're not happy with it. They don't like it. They want it to be a better experience, and they're willing to pay for it in a different way and still demand incredible value. And so I know we're going to get into that today, but that was my journey to move from emergency medicine into primary care. And I've just really become passionate about foundational primary care as a way to inflect, many of the challenges in our healthcare system. And it's a great base to build from, to create from, and to extend to solve a lot of the challenges that we're facing as a country. So.
Thank you, Scott. And this is actually what you just said leads well into what I wanted to kind of dive into next was what makes the primary care space so ripe for innovation today. I think each of you, there was a tidbit within, what led you to primary care, around the innovation that can happen in this space, but would love to dive more into that, starting with you, Scott.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab. So we actually have an expanded view of what primary care actually is. I think historically we thought of primary care as a doctor and maybe a nurse, and there's someone to go to when you're sick. And we just think fundamentally that needs to shift. And so we like the term primary health for a couple of reasons. One, it's beyond primary care. It's not just the doctor and the nurse, but now it should involve mental health, physical therapy, health coaching. Care navigation should probably be embedded in there, because what we're interested in is not transactional disease care. We're actually interested in health. We want people to be healthy and perform, and you got to get in front of this. And that's certainly something I learned in the emergency department. I think because of how we pay for healthcare, we really segmented into transactional medicine. You only get paid for the things you do, not the things you prevent. And so I've been a big proponent of more of a global view of payment, because I think that really moves you into value. I also think this technology has moved us from discontinuous medicine to now continuous medicine. I can constantly be connected to my members now through technology, which can inform and change how I practice. And so you don't need to physically come in for me to be caring for you. And the pandemic really accelerated this. So I think there's multiple trends going on that all feed into the innovations that we're seeing in primary care, everything from payment to delivery to integration, all speaking towards getting and moving to value. At the end of the day, I shouldn't be have to find a code to generate value. Like I should be able to deliver that objectively and get paid for keeping people well, as opposed to just doing things to people when they're sick. So again, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think that'll set this off. And I know Don and Kyna can extend that from there. So.
Thanks, Scott. We're going to kick it over to you, Don, now. Would love to hear your thoughts on, why this space is ripe for innovation.
Well, I think Scott and I have a ton of shared thinking and passion around what healthcare can be. And so I'll echo some of his concepts and my framework and mental model around it, which is I really see an opportunity to move from traditional provider networks to what I call a health network. And so I think the health network starts with the person at the center. It's competencies around knowing the individual, knowing the person. And as we know, and Kyna and Scott can echo, that's a hard idea in healthcare because status is variable. So sometimes, I want to be a person, but sometimes I'm a member, sometimes I'm a patient, sometimes I'm a caregiver on behalf of others. And sometimes in the world where Scott lives and where the Castlight side of our business grew up, there's incentive structures and benefits designed that have me acting in more of a consumer posture around how I navigate networks. So data-driven personalization is a huge opportunity for us to be more effective in what it means to really know the person and make it easier for him or her to navigate a health network. The second thing I think you have to do, really echoing Scott, is you have to incentivize health. And that means you are in a contractual framework where you're thinking about strategies that are oriented around avoidance of care and health or appropriate diagnostics to understand care plan and strategy. And so I think when you do that, you start to introduce new thinking around venue, where the office, contextual for hybrid, and the home are venues. And that's really where our legacy Vera business grew up. So I think if you know the person, if you incentivize health, I think those are necessary but insufficient. I think you then need to integrate care. And so in the work that we're doing with JP Morgan in the employer space, with Elevance, formerly Anthem, in the payer space, we're thinking about those integration strategies into a larger health network. And I think when you do that, you have a chance to do something fundamentally different relative to experience, quality, and cost.
Thanks, Don. Kyna, do you want to kind of add your 2 cents on top of that as well? And thank you for your patience in a snake structure. It's great when you get 2 questions basically in a row, but you have to wait sometimes when you're on the other end of it. So appreciate that, your patience.
No, no worries at all. I think both Don and Scott have shared a lot of fantastic insight, and I agree with all of it. I think maybe the perspective for me to add, I'm an economist by training, and just and I think the thing that stands out to me is, you look at the ROI of an incremental primary care dollar, and that's consistently shown in the literature to have an enormous return. And so I think the Oregon number is, an incremental dollar of primary care investment leads to $13 of downstream spend that gets saved and, avoided utilization, hospitalizations, et cetera. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing to point out in terms of the opportunity in primary care is the fact that as a country, we're spending less than 5% of our healthcare dollar on primary care, whereas most developed countries are spending, upwards of 12 to 15%. And so I think that just in and of itself, those 2 data points suggest enormous potential. And truly, primary care in the US, there are so many pockets where very strong, effective, high value primary care is happening. But there's so many barriers that have been built over time, especially in our kind of traditional fee for service, third party payer type infrastructure. And I think, today there's just, incredible innovation, I think, on all of the fronts that are needed for primary care to succeed. So one, it's the cost pressures. I mean, we've had these inflationary pressures in healthcare for a long time, a desire for more value. So how do we get more, value per healthcare dollar? Primary care stands up straight as a huge lever there. I think the second thing is the willingness to innovate on payment models, whether you're inside the healthcare system or outside of it, and what employers are leading, and a lot of what Scott and Don have referenced. There's a desire to say, hey, we have to think differently about how we pay, and it's okay if our dollars get reallocated, and more dollars get spent on primary care. And I think that's a huge opportunity that you're seeing today. And I think the third thing, and certainly my sweet spot, is technology, right? I think you have enormous amount of data that is now becoming available. You have an incredibly connected population, a digital native generation, and just the opportunity to intervene at the right time, right place for patients in a way that really elevates primary care as not only improving the patient's outcomes and their health, but also just their experience with healthcare and investing in their own health. So I think all of those tailwinds for healthcare, for primary care right now within healthcare, certainly make it very, very ripe for innovation and a really fantastic time to be doing work in this space.
Thanks, Kyna. We're going to bring it right back to you on the other end. So, all of you are innovators in this space, and wherever there's innovation, there's hurdles. So I'd love to hear from each of you what some of the biggest hurdles are, as you innovate in this space.
Should I just take a stab there as a start? Okay. Biggest hurdles in this space. I mean, certainly it is the legacy kind of infrastructure, right? And I talk about the tailwinds that I just mentioned, but at the end of the day, the center of gravity in healthcare, where the healthcare dollars go, where the interests go, where what people are used to, is a lot of the existing, kind of fee for service. Hospital-led or dominated kind of environment, and moving and shifting the dollars into, primary care, into ambulatory environments, into, when patients are healthy rather than when they're sick, I think is against the status quo. And so I think that certainly creates significant hurdles. And I think it comes back to also where and how you can build up your business. So something we've been really intentional about, along the way of our journey, there have been many opportunities to say, oh, we can grow revenue faster by leaning into, fee for service billing. And that's where the market is. That's what everybody's doing. But that would have closed the door to the opportunity to really be building a technology platform for the future, for a very different model of care. And I think that, having the opportunity to, make some really specific decisions to work towards that future, I think have served us well, but they're not necessarily what the entire industry is rewarding. So I've had a long awesome relationship with Scott and the team at Crossover, and it's opportunities like that where you find like-minded innovators who are really trying to change the future. I think that's what you have to search and find to really innovate and change. But the status quo sits all around you, and so it is an active effort.
Thanks, Kyna. We're going to kick it over to you, Dawn. And I'd like, if possible, I'd love for you to dive more into a piece that Kyna brought up in the beginning. One of the barriers are these old payment structures, the billing infrastructure. I would love if you in particular, along with your response, if you could also maybe touch upon that some more as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think all of us have talked about incentive structures contextual for the discussion up to this point. And Kyna did a really nice job getting at it in terms of what the hurdle rate looks like to disrupt in this space. Ron Adner, who I did a book with Georgetown earlier this year, The New Health Economy, and Ron Adner did the forward for it. And I think he rightly talks about the problem in U.S. healthcare as an ecosystem problem. And that's a little bit of what Kyna's getting at. And so, I'll start with government and policy because, one of the big things that I think early stage companies struggle with is really understanding flow of funds and payment and how it does or doesn't impact what happens in healthcare. Kyna, we're not in Canada inside a global budget construct where you get better and more sophisticated thinking in many ways around flow of funds. It is, to Scott's point, much more transactional. But the policy framework, Jared, really incentivizes, to Scott's earlier point, transactional focus around fee for service and volume in a way that can be inconsistent with what we're arguing the incentive structure should look like. But that's the first big dynamic that I think's at work. Then you get into Kyna's other really good point, which is that has implications then for how incumbents organize to think through strategies around health and care across the health economy. And so there's a lot about both the provider supply side and the payer infrastructure as a dimension of how we think about the person and what it looks like for them to operate in the health economy that have been organized around that traditional fee-for-service system. And therefore, all of that becomes a real hurdle rate to strategies that are oriented around the person, where we're trying to think about what does it look like, frequently to Scott's good point, in a with some modicum of information asymmetry, to really help him or her successfully think through and navigate a plan for health and care. So that's a pretty daunting set of things for any organization to try to tackle. And I think that's part of what you would hear from any entrepreneur or any early stage company that's working in this space.
Yeah. Thanks, Don. We'll bring it back to you, Scott, and thanks for your patience. You had a keen.
No, I'd echo what Don said. I mean, basically, we know that in the scientific research around medicine, it takes 17 years to go from a discovery of this is the right treatment or idea or concept to actual practice in the bedside. And so I think the same thing is happening in how the payment model works for primary care. Let me share where the rubber hits the road, right? So we are a primary care provider. We've had the privilege, as Kyna mentioned, to work with them for the last 5 or 6 years on this. But what happens is everyone talks a great game, primary care, value-based payment, all this stuff. And then it's like, okay, well, great. And here's what it costs to deliver that. You will take money from your specialty budget and you will apply it to the primary care budget, but it's going to pull down that specialty budget. So everyone kind of reads the literature, they see all the evidence, they see, overwhelming evidence that that's the fact. But when it comes down to it and we present the charge to deliver the service, everyone's like, well, I just did my actuary for the last 10 years and I spent X on primary care. And why are you guys charging more? And, that's not, right. The whole point of all that is that people they say they want value. They don't really understand what it means. And they often are not willing to pay for it until you can really show them the overwhelming results. And it's going to take some time. So we need to keep coming back with more evidence, more studies, and so forth. But I want to highlight that the gap between verbalizing I want to pay for value-based care and literally doing it, there is a gap. And I work in the commercial space exclusively, where people understand value and they're willing to pay for it. And I think that's a sector that will probably can move faster than some other parts. But we've also had great demonstrations in Medicare Advantage and others. So we think one of the big barriers is this payment model. And I'm just highlighting that when the rubber hits the road, it's hard for people to pay more for something without really seeing immediately how it pulls down everything else. And that's where I think more evidence, more data, more can do that. Now, what pulls that cost structure down? And everyone's kind of said different parts of this. You've got to have a great relationship, a trusted relationship with a core care team. That core team has to get to work to take care of all the prevention, the basics, and build enough of a confidence and trusted relationship and go after those chronic conditions that you may have. Pull that all down. And then we have to stay with you to steer, guide, and navigate you to the expensive, complex, confusing part of the healthcare system. And that whole cycle of care is what we're talking about here. And that's not really being done very well today, from the very beginning of building relationship to prevention to the back end when you actually have a big concern and you enter that system. How do we make all of that work? And again, financing this differently, having different technology to do that, and having outcomes that prove that this works is really what's required. And as we remove those barriers stepwise, then it will take time for the cultural adoption to happen. And it is a big fight. I mean, Kyna and I have been at this a long time. Don, you have as well, in different areas, and we're all in this now together. But there is a lot of work to do. We're excited to get after it. And what I will say is there are innovators stepping in and making that happen. Some on this call and others in the industry. And we have those first sets of clients who are really pushing this in the commercial space, which we're thrilled to see. And, it's going to be an exciting couple of years ahead.
Thanks, Scott. I want to, as we get ready to wrap up the episode, I'd like to go down the line again. We'll start with you, Scott. You were talking about, you were leading into it, and I was very, quiet in the background. I didn't want to jump in, but I'm going to jump in now regarding, what role does technology have in the future of primary care? And then I want to dive into, if you can also kind of part two to that, paint us a picture of what the future of primary care looks like through your lens, and then we'll go down the line. We'll go Scott, Don, and Kyna
Sure.
to wrap it up.
So I'll take tech first. We rely incredibly heavily on tech, not as the thing we put in between or in front of the patient or between us and the patient, but as a seamless accelerator and force multiplier of the work that we do. So that's a lot to say, but what I mean by that is it should be seamless, easy, and invisible, but make you so much more productive and capable. One of the big ways that we use technology is to be continuously connected to the member. And today that's done through messaging, asynchronous messaging, so forth. In the future, I believe it'll be done through more instrumentation where the member has more, devices and other things that are connected with their permission, which is critical. And I just see technology accelerating this, but it's not in the way that you think it's just, big tech solves all this stuff. It's got to be seamless and visible and a part of the way care happens. One just simple example of that is this idea of discontinuous versus continuous medicine. It used to be that you just show up when you're sick, and that's the only interaction you have with the doctor. Then you go away until the next time you're sick. That is such a poor version of what health should be. Can I now stay connected with you? And are there touches and other things I can do in between visits that are really useful to managing this? And so I see a future, to tie it to your last question, where the world I want to live in is the world where I have a care team that I know and trust that's around, that I get to access them through seamless technology, that I can go after and move forward on health plans that I have. And then when I really need care, that I have help to steer, guide, and get navigated to where I need to go. And all of that can be done in a way that I find valuable and am willing to, pay for that, whether through myself or the sponsor. So that's the world I'd love to live in, that is all seamlessly working. And it's a little bit Pollyannish at this point, but this is why all of us are here with our picks and shovels to make it happen. So excited about the future.
Thanks, Scott. We'll kick it over to you, Don.
Well, I love Scott's narrative around it. I mean, look, there was, you do get these regulatory triggers, Jared, that end up being relevant for waves of entrepreneurial activity. My first foray into this space was in 2006, 2007 timeframe, following, passage of the Medicare Modernization Act and creation of health savings accounts and some of the things that were playing out then. That's when Castlight and Verihole Health were both started in 2008. Certainly, to Scott's point, there was also a wave of activity following passage of the ACA, and in particular, specific to commercials, some of the dynamics around the Cadillac tax. And so what's different now? I think one of the things that's meaningfully different now is the data and technology landscape relative to healthcare. I think if you begin to understand at the systems level what's required to go drive strategy and approach around the person, our ability to identify the individual, which is non-trivial in healthcare, to do attribution, to think about then prediction, to Scott's point, to then begin to think about how we plan, how we manage, and how we measure progression in a way that's important not only for the individual around their health and care progression, but to Scott's point, also important in terms of how we quantify ROI and benefit relative to dollar invested. I think the data and technology landscape has meaningfully changed, and is a big reason to believe that strategies in this space can scale. The second thing I would say is that one of the things that it's a hurdle, but I think increasingly an opportunity that we can navigate is the organizing points for we've talked a lot at segment level today, but a lot of the organizing dimensions around how the person navigates health and care are local to a market. They're at the MSA level. And so we can get pockets of innovation around a discrete market and around network design, but it can be more difficult then for us to think about scale strategies on a multi-market basis. Again, I think data and technology are a big piece of how you think about not only driving the integration at the market level or MSA level, but also what it looks like to begin to think about capabilities above the local network that allow you to think about multi-market scale and the profitability of those network strategies. And so that's something that is exciting to me, and where I think there's real opportunities to put capital to work around the final point I would make, which is Scott's really good point around what does it look like to really think about an integrated care team. And I would say integrated care team that includes the individual as part of care team, and typically family member, particularly relative to high cost procedure areas. And so I think there's a chance for us to do that. And technology can be part of what makes it easier for us to think about multimodal communication and data access inside a consent framework that allows us to be more active participants in how we manage health and care. So I think there's a lot of reasons for enthusiasm, and I think the data and technology landscape is a big piece of it.
Thanks, Don. And Kyna, last but not least, would love your take on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As Scott and Don have mentioned, I mean, data and technology have an enormous role to play. I think, adding some perspective there on, as a technology player in the space, how we think about it. And, I really think technology should be an enabler of innovation in primary care. And one of the ways to do that is take a platform view, right? Like there's so much to primary care that is common across ways to innovate, and one of the roles that we can play as a technology platform is to provide a common platform that kind of takes care of the usual stuff that people need across primary care, and provide the APIs, the access to data, the ease of innovation on top of our platform that allows for that innovation. So we think a lot about how do we help our customers figure out new models of care, how do we help them prove those new models of care, and then ultimately how do we help them scale those new models of care. And I think in the world we're in today, every company has an element, or many, the best companies will have an element of technology in them. Like Scott and his team at Crossover, they have a great technology organization, and we help contribute to that. We help them, help enable them to do even more with their teams and do it faster. And that's certainly what we need. And we don't need anybody rebuilding everything from scratch. And I think it's really important for technology to one of the philosophies we have internally is this clinical first mentality that we apply as a philosophy across our product development. But I think that's really important for technology in primary care. Like, continue to keep in mind that the purpose of this technology is to support patient care, to support the patient physician relationship. And I think if as a community building technology for primary care, we can keep that front and center. I think that will accelerate, those visions for primary care that Don and Scott have laid out. I mean, I think there's just so much potential. And to piggyback on a couple ideas that have already been shared, like I love Scott's primary health idea. I don't know if I've told you that before, Scott, but it's, it comes up so regularly, this idea that primary care, there's some confusion when we use the word primary care, because they think of it as a very specific specialty as defined, in in the kind of medical education and specialty tracks. And it's really not. It really needs to be oriented around the patient experience. Like, it is a much broader term and a much broader set of capabilities, services, and support for patients that is their primary, like their first line of the healthcare system and their first touch. But that expansion of the role of primary care, I think, is one of the most exciting innovations that we're going to see. And really getting to that vision of personalized, accessible, trusted, right, informed care is I think what ultimately creates a win-win. That's what I love about primary care. Like, patients win, providers get to spend more time with their patients. Like, it's and costs come down. Like, there's so many wins coming out of it. So of course, yeah, very bullish and excited. about the future.
Yeah, one stat I have to throw out to what Kyna said earlier, the return on investment of, I think, 1 to 13 you mentioned. Also, primary care is the only specialty, it's the original specialty, but it's also the only specialty. The more you spend, the more value you get.
Yeah.
Everything else, the more heart surgeries you have, more that none of those things create value, but primary care is the one service that does. And so again, to all the points that have been made, it's just so critical that we look at this as the foundation to invest in recreating, and building the healthcare system of the future.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you all again so much for coming on the podcast. I can't wait to you were just on, and I can't wait to have you all on again to dive into some more, topics around primary care. Hopefully I'm able to see each of you at some of the upcoming conferences coming up. I'll be at HLTH, and if we don't see each other at that conference, I'm sure it's a tight group. I'm sure we'll see each other at one of these upcoming events. But yeah, thank you everyone, and can't wait to stay connected and learn more about what you're all building.